Well, welcome everybody to Wesley's Own Words, a midweek podcast by the United Methodist Church of Johnstown. My name is Jeremy Scott. I am your host for this, and we are working our way through Wesley's original writings. Though this time we're going to put a little bit of an asterisk on that because I got a bit of a kind of an audible I'm going to throw here. But we're looking at the advice to people called Methodists is the text that we are doing. And we just finished up last episode. Hopefully you've heard that one because this one will make a lot more sense if you had. Where Wesley is arguing that Methodists are a new people. They're a particular kind of people. They're predominantly made up of working class and working poor people, and because of who they are and the fact that they're getting organized and coming together, he finishes up last time reminding them that there's different chances that we cannot avoid giving offense. And what that means is there'll be people who are not going to be happy about Methodists and this whole thing that they are trying, this whole new way of being that they are trying to be. And so we ended last week where he introduces this idea, right? So this is who we are. We're a new people. We're dedicated to living in a particular way. We're dedicated to be particularly strong and growing in our faith. And because of who we are and what we are trying to do, some people may be offended, is his word, by us or challenged by us or whatever word we might want to use today. And then he goes on to what we're going to talk about today is where he kind of explores that more, right? He basically says, how might we give offense, right? How might people be troubled, shall we say, by what we're doing as Methodists? And he goes to expound on that now. And no doubt for some, or if not many Methodists, they are, they have already experienced some of this. And then people new to the Methodist movement, John Wesley wants to be upfront about things, that they are different and they're trying to live differently. And not everybody is appreciating the differences that they are bringing to the church and faith at the time. And then finally, of course, he reminds us last week that they're not trying to go out on their own. All right, so the difference this week is, I'm trying something a little bit different. The language in Wesley is hard. It's English, but it's 300 years ago, Oxford-educated English with a lot of run-on sentences. So I actually tried something this week where I endeavored to create an updated translation of it. So while holding tight to Wesley's original thoughts and ideas, tried to kind of do some light revisioning in order to kind of fix sentence structure and kind of dig into the meaning a little bit more. So his original words are going to be in the comments to this podcast, so you can read the original words there. But I'm actually going to read the translated version. And let me be very honest. I used some AI tools to actually do the translating, or at least give me the first draft of the translation, and then did some light retouching myself. You never can 100% trust what comes out of AI, but I was really impressed by the results. I will be honest. So this may be how we interact with this moving forward, because even in my classroom version of this, where we have time to explain, we spend a lot of time just trying to figure out what it is that Wesley's actually trying to say, and then we worry about the importance of what it is he's trying to say. It might be easier if we can just read something initially that actually makes sense to our modern ears. So we're going to read the first half of paragraph 13, I believe it is. Yep, paragraph 13, which happens to be a very long paragraph. So I'm going to read the first half of that. And again, he's just told them, you're going to give offense to people whether you like it or not, and that's just the way things are. So he's going on to expand about that. All right. Wesley writes, being a Methodist will undoubtedly lead to social friction. People will take offense not only to the name Methodist itself, but also to the core beliefs and practices of the movement. Those who hold strong opinions about religious traditions will be offended if you don't emphasize them enough. while others who oppose these traditions will be offended that you emphasize them too much. Those focused on outward religious behavior will likely be put off by your emphasis on the inner spiritual life. Even those who consider themselves moral may be offended by your insistence that faith in God is essential for salvation. All right, so hopefully you're already experiencing this is much easier to hear, which is good. But he's basically saying Methodist is a term that is already offensive to some. We've already talked about that a bunch. We don't need to talk about that anymore. But the label, that they're reclaiming the label Methodist, even though it means, for a lot of people, doesn't mean anything positive. So he's like, that alone is going to be a problem. But I love this idea, the kind of, darned if you do, darned if you don't, for those who are really strong in their religious traditions and really believe in the religious traditions, they're going to be upset with you because you're not doing them enough. And this was a thing then, and it still is a thing in churches today. Like there are churches and congregations today that get really enamored with how it is they've done things and the way they've always done things, and so to suggest or act as if you're going to do things in a different way is problematic, or that you're emphasizing something other than the kind of quote unquote traditional way of worshiping or the traditional beliefs or whatever you have. That the fact that they are new, right? And Wesley just said you are new. By that nature, that means they're not necessarily standing within the traditions of their time. And while they are keeping some of them, they're not keeping all of them. So for those for whom, religious practice is about observing the traditions as the dominant way of practicing faith, they're going to be challenged because the Methodists aren't going to continue to practice all of their traditions that have, maybe people have come up to. So there are those on that end of things who are going to be upset by, what's going on. All right. And then there's the other side of things, right? That those who, oppose traditions, right, are going to be upset that you're keeping some of them. Okay, like again, they don't want to separate from the Church of England. Wesley is sending them back to their local churches in order to receive communion and things like that. So the fact that they're holding to some of the traditions is going to offend those who want to just get rid of all of it. It's like burn the whole thing down. And we have those voices in the church today, right? They look around and say, I don't think the church is the way that it should be, and it's not doing everything it could. So let's just, get rid of the whole thing. And that's not a great idea. All right. So either way, they're going to be in trouble. Those who are focused on outward religious behavior, I hear echoes of Jesus, berating people who like to, pray in these ostentatious ways in the synagogue so everybody sees them, or giving their offering in this flamboyant, very obvious way so everybody can see that they're giving money, and people who are, most interested in being, observed. They're outward with their faith, outward with their religion, and that's the most important thing. I often wonder what Wesley and Jesus also would think about some of the really aggressive Christian T-shirts that you can see out there, or even things like bumper stickers, or whatever. Somebody related a story about being late and tired and everything, and their child reminding them as they were driving quickly down the road that, don't forget, Mom, you got a Christian fish on the back of this car. So, think about how aggressively you want to be driving right now. And I don't think T-shirts and bumper stickers are necessarily a bad thing, but if that's what it's about, if it's about kind of putting your religiosity on display for people, the fact that Methodists say, no, actually it is the inner spiritual life matters, and actually it matters the most, right? Wesley's not against putting your, faith into the world, into practice in a way that people can see by any means, but that's not the point. The point is to have that inward spiritual life, that inward transformation is the most important thing. And then finally, he talks about those who consider themselves moral, this idea that, people were like, well, I don't need to go to church. I don't need to be part of any of this. I don't need God because I'm just a good person. And sure, I've met plenty of people in my life that are good people who I'd say that's a good person, who aren't necessarily people of faith. But Wesley's saying that's not really the the point. We were supposed to be good people, right? We're do no harm, do good, stay connected with God, like all that stuff. He wants us out there doing good works in the world, all that kind of stuff. We are supposed to be good people, but we are good people because we recognize that we are called to love God and that God loves us. Right. And so just being a good person isn't quite enough to call yourself a Christian or call yourself a Methodist. Right. There's a faith component to it, a faith in God, a belief in God, a belief in Christ and belief in Christ's work, belief in Christ's, the salvation that we have through Christ, that belief matters, it matters. And that just simply, quote unquote acting quote unquote good is not frankly enough. And so for those people who are like, I'm a good person, I'm a moral person, I don't need God or this Jesus or anything, Wesley, kind of begs to differ a little bit. So that he's identifying groups there, like these people may be offended by who you are because you're basically not enough, and these are all kind of, you might have noticed these are all kind of people on the extremes, right? You have people who are extremely traditional and people who are extremely non-traditional, right? Methodism is kind of moving in the middle. Right? Like we honor the traditions that make sense, but we don't hold on to them so tightly when they don't make sense. When they have value, great, we hold on to the traditions. When they no longer have value, we don't. That we, aren't against being, obvious in our faith, but we don't make ourselves a spectacle. We don't, put that outward expression of faith is the most important thing. So this is Wesley kind of charting a middle ground between the extremes, and the extremes are not going to like that, right? The extremes want people to join them on the extreme. So, all right, so the second half of this paragraph, those who value reason may find your beliefs and spiritual experiences like inspiration, receiving the Holy Spirit as unreasonable. So basically those, we're kind of, hip deep into the Renaissance here. So those who are appealing to reason and thought, the fact that there is a mystery in our faith, right? There's things that we recognize are unknowable. We cannot fully know God. We cannot fully know God's grace. We cannot fully know, the world or how it works or anything like that. So, this idea that there are these things that feel like less reasoned, experiences that where you kind of just feel it on the inside, you feel it in your heart, you feel it in your soul, like it's real because you feel it and it's meaningful and it's important, but can you describe it? Like, is it, can you reason through it? No, sometimes you just feel. And so that's what he's talking about when, spiritual experiences like inspiration and receiving the Holy Spirit, that feels unreasonable to people who are basically trapped in their heads. And Wesley's like, no, there's a component of faith that is about your heart and your soul. And those will seem unreasonable to people who are overly fixated on reason. Okay. People who engage in sinful behavior will likely be offended by your avoidance of them and your disapproval of their actions. In fact, your entire lifestyle is likely to cause offense. Your temperate lifestyle will be a source of irritation to those who drink heavily. Your serious conversations will be equally off-putting to those who prefer superficiality. People will likely find your strict adherence to your beliefs to be excessive and unreasonable. They may be offended by your unwillingness to participate in certain activities that you consider inappropriate. This will likely cause friction with your friends and family. Therefore, you must choose between upholding your beliefs and your desire to please everyone. Wesley cares about what we do, how we spend our time, what we invest our time and energy and money on, and he wants us to do it on things that are important, right? He doesn't want to just fritter it away. He's not necessarily against things like rest and relaxation and, things like that. That's not necessarily what he means. But if you're going to rest, then rest intentionally, right? If you're going to take time for yourself, then take time for yourself intentionally. Like, don't just fritter away, I can't imagine what John Wesley would think of things like TikTok, right? That just kind of sucks your time and your attention away from you. But he's basically talking about that. He's talking about the numb scrolling that a lot of us have been guilty of doing, just whatever the 17th century, or 18th century equivalent of that is. Now, what's important, and this was part of the conversation in our classroom, is he's not saying don't be around those people. He's not saying separate yourself from everybody else. by any means. Wesley would spend time in the taverns and the bars and, in the fields where the people were and everything. And he would encourage Methodists to do the same, so he doesn't say this is important. He's not setting up this situation where we're supposed to separate ourselves and be, all on our own, in this safe little bubble. Far from it. Wesley wants us out in the world interacting with people. He just doesn't want us joining in when those around us are engaged in behaviors that are ultimately unhealthy for us, unhealthy for them, or whatever, and that are being present but not participating could cause people to notice. Right. So somebody may notice, hey, we're out at the bar, we're having a great time, but you're drinking a Diet Coke the whole time. Why don't you want to join in? Or, you're hanging out with your friends on the street corner and there's gambling going on, or, that's kind of more what happened back then, or whatever it is. Right. Or, people are gathering at the, in the break room or the lounge or whatever, and they're gossiping. Right. And they're just talking bad about this person and that person. And you choose not to participate in that. You choose not to add your own voice to the gossip that they are spreading, right? And that people may notice that, and it may make them uncomfortable, or may cause them to make themselves uncomfortable, right? Because people do tend to know, right? Like we know, especially when we're gossiping, or we're engaging in behavior that's really not good for us, or good for others, or really isn't healthy behavior. Most of the time we know, and we really don't like it when people point it out to us. And by abstaining, even if you don't say anything, just by abstaining and being present but not participating, some people may say it's like you're pointing something out to us, and we don't like you for that. So we're offended that you are, here. So it's important. The most important thing here is recognize that we are out in the world, we are in the world, we are moving in the world, we are around all kinds of crazy people. This is a movement of working class and working poor, people who don't have a lot of education. So they are in, what a lot of people of the time would, think of as kind of the darkest and dirtiest parts of the world. And they may not have no choice but to be there. So Wesley doesn't say you should exclude yourself from all of that, because probably you can't. You may be tied into your livelihood. But when unhealthy behaviors are being practiced around you, you don't join in. And that just the act of not joining in may cause some people to notice and be, as Wesley would say, offended by them. So, all right. So we move on to paragraph 14. The fact that you Methodists are organized into groups make your beliefs seem even more threatening to some people. This is because your unity makes you more noticeable to the public. It also makes people suspicious of you, especially those who don't understand or refuse to acknowledge your unwavering loyalty to God. Some people are afraid that you might be involved in some sort of secret plot, and this frightens them. Others who are zealous, but not in a good way, will find you even more objectionable if their zeal is not driven by genuine love of God and others. Okay. Wesley recognizes that he's already said again that this is a movement of the working class, working poor, people that the rest of society is really good at ignoring, right? They're really good at ignoring, the plight of these folks, or that, these are the, I think about the period British dramas of the day, the upstairs, downstairs, whereas, the downstairs servant class people, right? Well, I mean, those who are upstairs and being served tend to be rather good at ignoring their servants, right? I mean, they're not, that is kind of a cliche, but it's also true. And it's easy to ignore individuals, right? It's easy to ignore one person. It's hard to ignore groups of people. And so the fact that they are getting organized, they are meeting together. In these meetings, they're open. Methodist meetings are open. Anyone can come at this time and participate and see what's going on. It's just that the wealthier people, the more privileged people don't, right? Because they don't want to associate necessarily with the kind of people who are being attracted to Methodism at this time. But they're also suspicious of what's happening over there, right? Like, what are these folks talking about? I was reminded, I remember it was a big scandal. I think it was like 20 years ago now, that, every time that a group of employees at a Walmart, started to talk about maybe thinking about unionizing, like suddenly there's cameras all over there's cameras on the wall, there's cameras all over the store, and, people who are, maybe part of that conversation suddenly find themselves transferred or maybe even fired, because, the Walmart does not want its employees to get organized in that way. And, think what you will about unions, but that at least in its purest form is the intention of unions, right? Is to organize laborers who individually don't have much power and authority into a group that will have some ability to negotiate. People are concerned that Methodists may be doing something similar. They're organizing, working class people together who individually don't have much say or authority in the world, through organizing, suddenly they might gain some voice or gain some power by working together, working collectively. And people are worried about that. And he knows that people are worried about it. And really the secret sauce of Wesley is this organizing, right? There were other field preachers in Wesley's day. The fact that he organized people into groups, the class and band meetings we've talked about before, the fact that he organized people into groups and encouraged them to be together in community together and created space for them to be community together outside of the church. Wesley, I don't think they've quite started building meeting houses, but eventually Methodists will start building meeting houses for them to work in. All of that is suspicious to especially people of privilege or people of authority, and they really don't want their authority messed with. So it's beginning to cause concern, and it will continue on to cause concern. And throughout Wesley's life, there will be all of these rumors and misnomers about, Methodism and, what it is and what it's really about. And it's a secret plot and, of the working class to, overthrow the ruling elite and blah, 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 blah. Now, there are the footnote here, and what Wesley doesn't know, because this hasn't happened yet, he doesn't know where Methodism is going to go, that he thinks it's going to continue to grow, and it will. There are historians that will argue that the rise of the Methodist Church, which would become pretty popular, it's never going to become the majority religion, but it would become something that a lot of folks would be a part of, especially, again, those working class, working poor, is one of the major factors why Britain never had the kind of bloody revolutions that France and most of the rest of the Europe had, right? They still have Europe, Britain, UK still has a king, right? They never, since Wesley's time to today, they never overthrew the king. Well, if you look at history, and especially places like France, but then again, Germany and, all these other places that used to have monarchies that no longer do, who got rid of who did the overthrowing? Well, it was the proletariat. It was the working class, working poor. The Bolshevik revolution, the Bolshevik revolution in Russia, the reign of terror in France. These are all uprisings by working class and working poor people to depose kings and other noble people to try to force some social change. And the Methodism, some have argued, has basically provided a relief valve for that impulse, because instead of, organizing people to overthrow the king, which is what happened in other places, Wesley's organizing people, but he's organizing people to do something else. He's organizing people to care for themselves, right? He's organizing people to support each other. Right? He's creating communities that will support each other and build each other up. And he's directing all of that energy that people have around, their kind of, their feelings about their kind of quote unquote lot in life. And he's organizing it in a much more productive and ways for them, creating, disciplines within people, that, yes, Methodists would go on and they would argue for, various kinds of reform, government reform and prison reform and all that kind of stuff. And they would argue for it, but they would do it within the system, because Wesley himself was trying to work within the system of the church. He would encourage Methodists to continue to work within the system of the church and work within the system of the government. So it's not that he didn't want to make change, and change did come, right? The king and the monarchy in the UK today is not like it was before, right? They're, very democratic now, and there was a lot of advocacy for them to become more democratic, advocacy for them to get out of things like the slave trade and all that kind of stuff. And a lot of that would come from Methodists. So we would advocate for social change for sure, but we would do it within the system. Right? Instead of, using that upset, using that, people's upsetness about, how they feel like they're being treated, instead of funneling that into some kind of like revolutionary kind of thing or idea. Instead, they're doing it in a more constructive sort of way. But the people at the time, and especially the people in authority, the people of privilege at the time, don't know that either. They just see this group of people that they feel could threaten their power and their privilege, and they don't want that. All right, and then the final paragraph today, we're going to paragraph 15. The resentment towards you will likely intensify because you are made up of members from various other churches. The influential members of those churches will find it difficult to believe that you do not look down on them or their pastors. They will probably assume that you're completely condemn them and believe they cannot be saved. This resentment is at its peak right now because your movement is still new and growing. They don't know how large it will become. And the fear of losing members to your group fuels their anger and resentment towards you. All right, let's quickly kind of work that one backwards. He's saying that there's a peak, and it won't be the peak, but there's a growing, and it feels like there's a peaking resentment and animosity towards Methodists. And the problem that people have is their Methodism has been around long enough and it's grown enough that it is a thing, that people know what it is, but they don't know how far it's going to go, right? They don't know how big it's going to get. So they don't know how worried they need to be, which even makes them even more anxious. That unknowing of how big this thing is that looks concerning to us is a problem. And it is causing people to have stress and anxiety and to be concerned about this Methodist, what they're doing. And it's peaking now because they are in a rapid ascent, right? They are rapidly growing, and that's causing concern. They're also bringing people together from all over. And this time, the world is carved up into geographical parishes, and within that parish, there would be a church. And pastors didn't go between parishes, and I wouldn't come into, if you were another pastor in the nearby town, I wouldn't come to your parish and preach with your people, to your people without your permission, and you wouldn't come into mine without my permission. There was a lot of territorialness amongst churches and clergy at the time. And here the Methodists are grabbing a few people from this church and a few people from this church and a few people from this church and putting them all together in this other place to do some religious and practice and faith development together. And people find that as challenging to their authority, right? Like, why aren't you just coming here and doing that? And the fact that the people are mixing in a way that they didn't mix before is a problem. And the influential members of the church, right? Those who are invested in that particular church, in that particular place, in that particular congregation, they're probably an important person, a leader in that congregation, doesn't want to see people leave, right? Doesn't want to see people, going other places. I mean, this isn't just unique to church, right? This is unique to all kinds of stuff, right? If you're in a business and you start, losing employees to your competitor, like, that doesn't feel good. And while Wesley continues to say, and will continue to say, I'm not trying to do a new thing, and people still need to participate in their local churches, to some degree, the more time and energy that Methodism captures from folks and puts to use, right, for the leaders of those local churches who, really in their mind are playing this, zero-sum game, they're challenged by that. And they don't like that. And they don't want to see that happen. So, these are the people, and this is the ways in which he sees Methodism giving offense as an organization, right? And that's really what he's talking about here. Individual Methodists, maybe, if you're the only one, not, living it up and drinking it up at the party, you're going to get noticed, and that may cause some struggle for you as an individual. But the real struggles for Methodism will come as a group, as a collective, when people start to take notice and concern about this new organized group of people and what they are. And it doesn't matter, people have been conspiratorially minded, basically as long as there have been people. So it doesn't matter that Wesley's out there saying over and over again, nope, this is what we're about. This is what we're about. This is what we're about. We're about this. We're about spiritual life. We're about spiritual health. We're about helping people grow in their relationship with Jesus Christ. We're helping people love God, neighbor, and themselves. Like, he goes over and over and over again, and he never wavers from that point. but, people will see dragons where they want to see dragons, and challenges where they want to see challenges. So that's the way in which Wesley sees some concerns that people might have about the offense they may be given. So I'm really loving this new kind of updated version. Again, I'll have the original version in the comments so you can take a look at that. But I think this translated version really works really well. In the classroom version of this, we're actually reading both. We're reading the original and then we're reading the translation, which is how you probably should do things. But this is Wesley's writings is the gift that just keeps on giving, and in many ways, hopefully, you can see overlaps with this today. Like, we have people who are overly enamored, with tradition today above all else. We have people who are, overly enamored with the idea of just, throwing all of church away, right? Let's just throw it all away and start over. Wesley's charting that middle course down the middle, and that's what Methodism would become, right? This both and middle ground, but like a radical kind of middle ground. And we'll see that as we go on in this. So, today we are probably not as offensive. The word Methodist is not offensive. In fact, in most surveys, Methodists amongst the brands, Christian brands, has some of the stronger, at least it used to be true, had some of the stronger people's positive feelings toward it. I mean, with kind of Baptists being the bottom of the barrel as far as, non-church people and how they feel about, that word. Methodists actually usually pull rather high today. So we're not going to be, offensive in that same way. And yet, when a group of people starts to stand out, when people start to organize, a group of people starts to stand out, when they start to draw attention to themselves for the way that they are, and this happens in churches today. Like, you start to draw attention to yourself because of what you're doing in your community, how active and you are, and the work that you are doing. There are those who might celebrate that work, and there are those who might be offended, or challenged. Like who you're stepping up to be, if a church is stepping up to be, a contributor to its community in a new and exciting way, like that's great. But there are those who are going to look at that, with some suspicion. Like, what are your real motives? What are you trying to do? That kind of thing. That still happens today, unfortunately. All that is old is sometimes new again. All right. Well, thank you for joining me in this. We're going to keep on plugging away through this. We've probably got 2 or 3 weeks left, 2 or 3 sessions left on Advice to People Called Methodists. After that, we'll probably do one of John Wesley's sermons. And so they're going to be talking to the group on which one it is, but we may go to one of John Wesley's sermons and instead of these that have been kind of an overview of a lot of different topics, in the sermons, he really dives into one topic. So that's probably where we'll go next. But all right. Well, thank you for being part of this. Please, share this with somebody you think might be interested, and if something in here struck you and you found it entertaining or exciting or insightful or whatever, share that with somebody. We'd really love to see this continue to grow. It's definitely growing, but we want to see, this continue to grow, and I would love that. So please help us out and do that. And until we see each other again, have a blessed day.